Hey, welcome to the Cory Morgan Show, second one of this ongoing general election, which began as an election about nothing and now seems to be turning into quite the race. We've got some great developments or bad developments, depending on what side of the spectrum you sit on. Things have been changing. The locked victory for the Liberals clearly isn't nearly as locked as they'd hoped it would be when they dropped the writ there. I'll be speaking to guest a little later on, Michelle Stirling from the Friends of Science. We'll talk a little bit about climate change, electric vehicles, the great transition, all of those trendy things. It hasn't really been coming up a lot in this election yet, though. I mean, those are a lot of Trudeau's core issues and principles, so I suspect they're going to be coming up a little later on. So we get some of that groundwork done and then, talk about what's happening with those sorts of things. Speaking for ourselves here, membership with the Western Standard has been fantastic. Thank you very much, all of you who are members with the Western Standard. If you aren't a member already, we're independent media. We're not taking government funding. They're not offering us any funding, but that allows us to speak completely unvarnished, unbiased. Well, we have our biases, but it's not being pushed down from above on us by any state or government or anything like that. We can cover whatever the heck we like. The only way we can do that, though, is if you guys keep supporting us like you have. So if you haven't taken out a membership with the Western Standard yet, please go to the Western Standard online, take out a membership, even on a trial basis. You'll find for $10 a month, you're getting some really good news content, some really good columns, some unique stuff that you're not going to get anywhere else. And it supports us, and we can keep generating that content for you. It's so important. The media is changing. It's changing all around. The mainstream media is going to hell. We're filling the void, and we rely on members like you to be able to keep doing that. So you've been supporting us great so far, and those who haven't already signed up, please do. As well with these videos, share this YouTube video, share this on your Twitter account, Facebook. If you aren't following already, subscribe, get on there. It all helps. This is how we can spread out, communicate with each other, and keep having good news coverage throughout things like elections right now when BS from the mainstream media unfortunately tends to dominate, and we end up voting in and re-electing bad politicians. So, starting with that, let's talk about bad politicians. They always give us lots to work with. So as I said, we've seen a dramatic shift in the polls. The Liberals looked like they were coming into this with a comfortable lead. Somehow in the first week of the campaign, everything's already fallen apart for the Liberals. It's gone to hell. You can see the tension in them. I mean, Justin there was stammering more than usual and getting quite grumpy when the lines of questioning were coming at the conferences. You gotta remember, Justin's an actor. If he's got a script, he can pull it off. He can talk about things. He has to have, though, a solid script. Somebody brighter than him has to be able to write it for him. If he can't read it, if he can't memorize it and spit it back out, he's in trouble. When he has to think on his feet, well, his shoes are usually on the wrong feet, so you understand where that goes. And he's been stuck at these conferences. There's been hecklers going after him. He's been getting nervous. He's been getting agitated. The media asked him a little while back, if he regretted calling the election just before the Afghan pullout and disaster that's happening over in Afghanistan happened. And he didn't even answer the question. He treated it like question period. Again, he seemed kind of grouchy, and he just went on rambling about other things and then attacked Aaron O'Toole. Well, that's fine, but you better come up with an answer for it. To be honest, I thought that would have been a relatively easy one. That's one of the few things I almost don't blame him for, at least with the timing. You don't see those things necessarily coming. When you call an election, you can't be held responsible for the issues that broke during it. That's just the chances you take when you called it. But again, Prime Minister Trudeau, he can't think up answers on his own. So obviously that wasn't in his morning briefing. They didn't give him a canned stock answer to do, so he got flustered and looked all the more foolish. And you see Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, one of the ones who's usually considered one of the brighter ones in Justin's cabinet. Seamus O'Regan certainly wasn't, or Catherine McKenna. But you did have Freeland, who seemed to be reasonably competent, puts out a grossly doctored video of Aaron O'Toole talking about possibilities for private-public mixed provision of healthcare. It was blatant to the point that Twitter actually flagged it as misleading media. And rather than, back off, rather than admit a mistake, rather than just delete the thing and let this go, they doubled down. Trudeau retweets it. Trudeau goes on about it with this BS doctored video saying it's proof that Aaron O'Toole wants to privatize healthcare. Trudeau, you've just been caught, essentially, or at least that video was a lie, the way it's been doctored, and instead of just backing out of the bloody thing, you double down on the lie. People could see the proof otherwise. The whole 2-minute video was there. They could see what you guys did to him. You look like an idiot. Well, it's nothing new. But you're looking more like one, and it's certainly easy to prove. So carry on. Now, was it Napoleon who said, I'm not sure now, or maybe it was Machiavelli or something from The Art of War, but something like when the enemy is busy destroying themselves, don't get in their way. Just give them rope, carry on. And that would be a wise strategy on the parts of the Conservatives right now, who have to be pretty happy. I mean, they were coming into this pretty dejected, thinking they might be running into just, at best, maintaining a minority liberal government. They might actually be looking at forming a government, if only a minority one soon, a conservative one. But how are they getting there? And that's where I'm starting to get concerned. I mean, what remnants of conservative policy are there left? Some of the stuff coming out of O'Toole has been shocking. Well, one that really got me was when he's talking about mandating labor presence on the boards of private corporations. Mandating employees have to be sitting on the board of directors of a private corporation. Who the hell do you think you are? That's a private corporation, and I know you were talking about federally regulated ones, but it doesn't matter. It's bad enough to try and outspend each other like mad, which you guys are doing, but this is a case of you going into the boardrooms of private corporations and telling them how to run their business. That is not a conservative policy. Even Jagmeet Singh didn't call for that. Of course, he'd want to make them all crown corporations. I guess you just want to do it by increments, Mr. O'Toole. This is not cool. This is not a good way to go. This is how you shake investment away from our country that's already, when we're looking at Alberta, an investment pariah because we have a hostile federal government. And you want to insert the federal government into the boardrooms of private corporations through regulation and force them to have a labor component on their board. I mean, some people are saying, it's a great idea, you should have it, you should get that. Well, then let them decide it. It's their corporation. Let the shareholders decide it. If labor really wants to control corporations, it's pretty easy. Buy shares. Form your own. Why have your cooperatives not taken everything over? I mean, boy, labor, you guys know how to run everything better than CEOs. Why have you never managed to do it, though? Either way, that's the road O'Toole's been going down, and it's disturbing. He's talking about massive money to build housing for people. Is that even a federal jurisdiction thing? I mean, we do have some problems with housing. We could do some policy tweaks. We can examine foreign ownership, but how many dollars do we want to put in to build or buy houses for other people? The rest of us had to work our asses off for a down payment. That's the way it works. That reduces the defaults on loans. But you want to bypass that. Again, you're just throwing out the shallow promises and promises and promises that we can't afford right now. I understand you can't come off as a hard, cold conservative in this time of crisis on every level, but you've got to at least retain a little bit of difference from the Liberals, at least stay a little to the right of them, and I'm not seeing a lot of evidence of that. Another area was the CBC. You backed off on that fast enough, O'Toole. You were, in your leadership, if I recall, promising to actually defund the CBC. You backtracked on that. No, now you're going to strike a committee on it. That's another double-speak way of saying you're not going to do a damn thing about it. So you got scared of the state broadcaster. And you know what, O'Toole? They're still not going to like you. They're still not going to be nice to you. They're the CBC. I mean, you're just trying to appease a bloated government tagger that's still going to eat you. So don't. You should have stuck to your original promise. You're not going to gain good press out of this. At least, he did speak about getting rid of the subsidies that are going to the other press in the private market. That's a good move in the right direction. But I mean, again, strategically, okay, so you've appeased the CBC who still hates you, and now you're ticking off the rest of the media who never were all that warm with you to begin with, but are probably going to be worse. Either way, it is only about a quarter of the way through the federal election campaign. If we can see it swing this much in the first quarter, it could swing dramatically in any number of ways in the next 3 quarters coming up. But I mean, momentum is everything, and Trudeau's already lost a quarter of this thing. It's hard to come back. It's interesting to watch this. 3 weeks ago, none of us would have imagined that O'Toole looked like he might be poised to become the next prime minister. This might happen. We'll see. Time will tell. Now, I'm going to get to my guest right away, but first as well, not just thanking members, but I got to thank sponsors. When we get members, we get viewers, we get sponsors, people have products, services. It's the great capitalist way, and we spread the word for what they're providing, and they help us pay our bills around here. One of whom has been with us for quite some time is the CCFR, and that's the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights. These guys have been working hard. They're out there. They're standing up for the rights of firearm owners to own, use, enjoy firearms responsibly. I mean, that's a given. The word doesn't really need to be said. If you're a criminal, no, we don't want you to have a firearm. If you're going to use it for criminal use, there's a problem with that. But the vast, vast majority of Canadians are legal firearm owners, are harmless firearm owners, and the CCFR is standing up for them. So if you go to firearmrights.ca and you look and there's a button to say why join us, give it a click, firearmrights.ca. And you click on why join us and they'll lay out exactly what they're doing for you and why you should join them and support them. And they're actually suing the government right now because the government's been doing orders and councils to force the purchase of legally acquired firearms and property from people. It's not right. Somebody's got to push back. Again, our federal politicians don't have the courage to do so, so these guys are doing it on your behalf. The other sponsor is the Resistance Coffee Company. These guys are really fun. I've talked about them a lot of times. They make great coffee. They're local roasters. You order them online. They deliver to your house. 10% of everything you spend with them goes towards good, non-woke causes. So we're talking causes like the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. They're going to take 10% of your money and put it towards a group that's fighting to help retain and maintain your individual rights. So you can be comfortable knowing that a chunk of that money is going towards that. Plus, if it's on your very first order, if you put in the promo code Western Standard, there'll be a little box there. Just fill it in Western Standard, all one word. You'll get another 10% off your purchase. So you can try out this coffee. They got all those great names like Liberal Tears and Defund the CBC and Black Gold. Check it out. It's good coffee. Get an order. They'll deliver it to your door. It's fast. It's efficient. Your money goes towards good causes. And of course, they sponsor us, and that's another good cause, right? So check them out. Now, next, I am going to get on with Michelle Stirling of the Friends of Science. You've probably seen her on social media. She's been managing that group for quite some time. They put out a lot of good papers, studies that are at least contrary to the talking points, the general lines on things like climate change and carbon taxes and things such as that. We haven't been hearing a lot in the election about the climate change yet, but we know we're going to. So I had a really good chat with Michelle about that, and tune in and see what she has to say. Okay, well, thanks for joining me today, Michelle. It's good to see you again, and it's always easy to find lots to talk about. Of course, you specialize in a few things with Friends of Science, and something that leading up to the election has been a really big issue is climate change, environment, things like that. I would have thought that the Liberals would have come right out of the gates and dove into that issue. We've been hearing a little bit, but it hasn't been top of mind yet. Why do you think they're putting it off?
Well, it may be because the most recent IPCC report that the media reported as code red and catastrophe, which was coming from Guterres' press release and not from the report itself. But the new report, according to Roger Pielke Jr., is very optimistic because they've abandoned what's known as RCP 8.5, which was the most catastrophic scenario, and said that that's least likely now. So actually the climate emergency is over, and we do have time. So, it's going to be hard for the Liberals to square that with all of their climate catastrophe thinking. And also, I should mention, just before the election was called, we had sent an open letter to a number of people on Jonathan Wilkinson's call for an adult debate on environment and climate. And we think that that would be an excellent idea. So he inadvertently made that statement, probably inadvertently, when he was critiquing the Conservative Party's climate plan. But in fact, let's have that open debate.
Well, it is refreshing to say them even admit it's a bit debatable, perhaps. I mean, they've always tried to say it's case closed, the science settled, we can't even talk about it, we just got to move on with measures.
Right. And some of those measures, people should know that there's a group called the Climate Emergency Unit, which is part of the David Suzuki Foundation or Institute. And my friend calls them the Climate Taliban, but they're now demanding that since there's an alleged climate emergency, that in World War II, the Canadian government created 28 crown corporations. And within 2 years, Canada increased aircraft manufacturing 25-fold. So they think the same thing should be applied to the Green New Deal and the supposed just transition. Well, in fact, there's just no transition going on. Canada has maybe 3.5% of the energy generated from wind and solar, and the rest is from fossil fuels, hydro and nuclear. So, we shouldn't take these people's advice because they haven't done any due diligence, no cost benefit analysis, It's purely ideological. And in fact, the irony of this is that indeed, during World War II, the government did create a number of crown corporations, but immediately after, C.D. Howe did everything he could to re-privatize that and turn it back to free market. So, it's actually, for them, it's a bad example to use.
Yeah, no, we don't need any more bloated crown corporations. They've rarely done us any favors. And that seems to be the trend of the day, though. I mean, governments can get away with a whole heck of a lot as long as they can convince everybody it's an emergency, it's pressing, and they can bypass normal democratic means of change because it's just so critical that they have to do something right now. And we're certainly seeing that with the pandemic as well.
Right. And you can see also that the climate activists are also the COVID activists. I mean, look at Dr. Joe Vipond, who's out there running around with his little climate button on and claiming we should all be locked down forever. If you look deeper into this, you'll find that the Deutsche Bank out of Germany, if you can believe this, is calling for an eco-dictatorship to force people to not use energy. And basically, that'll kill a lot of people, especially in Canada. They're pushing for no natural gas use in Canada. So, and electrifying everything. That would cost trillions of dollars that we don't have. It would take decades, not 10 or 15 years as they propose. And in the process, many people would die.
Yeah, well, let's assume that perhaps that's the way to go. And we will actually get to a point where the whole world's on electricity. But realistically, we're looking at 40, 50, 60 years before we could get to that point. But these crazy transition plans and things are saying we should shut in our conventional energy right now and retrain people to blow in windmills or whatever they're supposed to do for their new jobs. They're really putting the cart before the horse. I mean, we've seen the consequences of that south of the border where Biden worked so hard and so fast to shut down domestic energy supplies, and now he's cap in hand groveling to OPEC to try and get them to increase production.
Yes, well, people have to realize that electricity is not a form of energy. It's created from energy like coal, natural gas, and oil. And of course, the Greens don't like nuclear. And so, we either will be reliant on imports from other countries and pretend that we don't have emissions here, like the Biden administration appears to be doing, or, we'll get some common sense and stop with these nonsensical climate emergency net zero plans.
Yeah, I mean, they're all over the map. They want to shut down all petrochemical forms of generation. And yes, they're absolutely opposed to nuclear. But even with hydroelectric, they're fighting Site C for all they're worth in BC. I mean, if we went to this electric world that they want to see, we'd have to be digging and building hydroelectric plants in a massive scale with an incredible footprint and a lot of energy burned in creating these new dams.
Right. Well, it would take another 10,000 additional megawatts of power generation for Canada just for electric vehicle policy. And each of those, that would be like 8 or 10 Site C dams or Muskrat Falls. And each of those take 10 to 20 or 20 to 30 years horizon to build them. Not to mention it's billions of dollars to build them. And you have to build the infrastructure to go with them. All the big high voltage transmission lines, that's very, very expensive. And it often takes decades to do the land expropriation for that, to negotiate the deal. So, they're completely out to lunch and no realistic assessment whatsoever and no cost benefit analysis. So people should be called out on that. These are very dangerous plans. It's very likely that we could get stuck halfway out of money and in the dark.
Well, and those upgrades, again, are going to take a lot of time and a lot of money all the way down to the household level. I mean, your average household doesn't have the means or ability to plug in an electric vehicle at this time.
That's right. Yeah. And all the regional distribution lines within the cities would also have to be upgraded. And think of the thousands of cars that park on the street. You're not going to be running a big power line to plug in your EV on the street. So that means people will have to be lined up at certain chargers. And actually, the media is doing a disservice to the public because they're cheerleading all of these things. We've got some really great reports done by professional engineers here in Alberta on our blog. One is called The True Cost of Wind and Solar to Alberta. The cost for battery storage for Alberta for one day would be somewhere in the vicinity of $2 trillion. So people really have to learn about this stuff. We've got another one about the Carmen Gay solar farm, where every Albertan is subsidizing every citizen of Carmen Gay for $921 a year so they can pretend to be carbon neutral. And we've got another one on CTV's misleading math on EVs coming to Alberta. So, I think if people can look at some of these reports, when we've got one more called What You Need to Know About Renewables That Pembina Institute Won't Tell You. So I hope that people will have a look at that, because it gives you a real good idea of what we're facing.
Yeah, well, and aside from people wanting to feel cleaner and greener and all that, they really have to look at what this is going to cost and where it's going to hit them in the pocketbook. And I think a lot of proponents of electric vehicles really have a mental deficit when it comes to thinking of supply and demand. I've heard people talk about, look how cheap it would be to charge a car, look how fantastic it would be. Guys, if we suddenly have millions of electric cars in Canada, the prices for electricity are going to go through the roof. Even if you don't drive, lighting your household now, powering your house, you won't have natural gas heat anymore, so it's going to be electric heat. Your cost of living is going to go through the roof.
That's right. And none of these things can be done in short order. And also, we have a series of 3 reports on EVs by Robert Lyman, which begins with false expectations. And people probably don't realize it, but when you buy a conventional car, you're actually financing EVs because, for instance, with Tesla, Tesla made the most money from renewable energy certificate purchases by other car manufacturers. So that's being tacked on your conventional vehicle.
Well, and the pressure is coming from all directions, and we're seeing it a lot from the corporate world now too, though. They're turning around and virtue signaling, Shell's going into renewables, and the auto plants are saying they're going to retool and do nothing but electric. This is going to cost them terribly in the long run, I would think.
Well, unfortunately, it seems to be that they're institutional investors in these companies. They're all signed up with the UNPRI, the United Nations Principle for Responsible Investment, whose fiduciary guru is Al Gore. And of course, they all follow what Mark Carney says. These institutional investors are making the biggest mistake of their life if they're divesting of fossil fuels and going into green. And in fact, in 2013, Joseph Deere, who was the CIO of CalPERS, said that clean tech is an L for lose investment, and we're not here to lose money. So these corporations are being cornered into it by their institutional investors. Sometimes they make a profit because it's subsidized, but where's that subsidy coming from? It's coming from you, and there's an end point where taxpayers can never continue to support these charitable NGOs that are pushing for these policies and these green crony capitalists. We're out of money. We're broke.
Yeah, well, we just seem to have, when I think of the last big transportation change we made, transition, it was, say, from the horse and wagon to the personal automobile and vehicle. But they didn't bring that about by punishing horse and wagon drivers in order to subsidize the niche market of automobiles. I mean, it took time. They were luxuries. They were a novelty for a while until finally Ford came around and made them cost effective for the average individual. People bought in, and eventually the horse and wagon went away. But we just can't seem to let the free market deal with electric vehicles and let them evolve on their own as the past transition did.
Right. And ironically that you mentioned horse and wagon, there's a professor out in BC who is proposing that we should have a smaller footprint, and therefore today we should be breeding Friesian and other, big draft horses so that we can go back to working the fields with a horse and, a few hardy men. This is a professor at a university, okay? I mean...
Yeah, that's magnificent if we want mass starvation. I mean...
Yes.
Sure, 150 years ago, that's how the world was fed, but the population was a tiny fraction of what it is today, and starvation was pretty common. Famines came and went all the time. It's frightening to think that people with tenure in our quote-unquote higher levels of educational institutions are like that, but it's not surprising anymore, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no, it's quite shocking. And, again, many of these policies, like people are advocating have one less child, eat less meat, eat more veggies. One of the authors of one of those reports is from Sweden. Well, where do you think all those veggies come from? They have to be shipped there, and this whole thing of having one less child is ludicrous because the world population is actually facing a big drop off in the next few years anyway, because all us boomers will be going away. So, it's really, really sick. And actually, some of that idea of depopulation comes from those RCP 8.5 scenarios that I mentioned before. The other scenarios in that group have 3 billion fewer people. So in their modeling, they designed it with 3 billion fewer people, but that might mean that some of these climate activists, the real nutty ones, believe that we should have 3 billion fewer people. And that was never the intent of those scenarios. But there's a real, sick kind of depopulation mentality in a lot of the climate community.
Yeah, well, and if people want to choose not to have kids, just let them have the choice. That's just where we got to leave things, a bit with what you're talking about before too. Like, I'll have some hipster lecturing me on how I'm so selfish with my luxuries in winter and travel while they're eating their avocado toast in Calgary in January. I mean, I haven't seen many domestic avocado trees lately. Maybe they just don't understand where that's coming from.
Yes, ludicrous. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, just to kind of wrap things up though, as we are in the election period, what do you think we could look forward to? I mean, are there any positives we might see coming out of some of the parties or candidates or things we can hope to look forward to?
Boy, it's pretty hard to say because the ENGOs are so powerful. Between 2000 and 2018, the top 40 ENGOs in Canada had 18 times the revenues of all political parties combined. So they're an incredibly powerful force, both in terms of money, influence, media influence. We found that the Strathmere group, which is like 14 of the largest ENGOs in Canada, had been meeting with the media and planning strategy prior to the 2015 election. This is on the Boothroyd Communications site. They're very proud of it. So, these are kind of a pack that ordinary citizens just, we don't have that kind of financial or social influence. And unfortunately, they are very cause-oriented. So when we citizens, or when our group Friends of Science, ask for open civil debate, as you said, no debate, they shut it down, purely ideology, and it's very difficult to reason on these things. So, I don't know what the future holds in the election campaign, but hopefully someone will come to their senses.
Well, it's frustrating, but hopefully people are paying attention and speak to their elected officials, or at least the candidates going ahead. And your site does provide a massive amount of resources and reports. So maybe to close up, where can we find more information on you and the Friends of Science, and where can people get more information?
Well, we're at friendsofscience.org, and we're on Facebook as well. We're on Twitter, Friends O Science, and we also have a blog that's very active. We're on LinkedIn, and we invite people to join the debate, share our material, challenge us. That's fine. We're interested in open civil debate.
Great. Well, thank you very much for joining me today, Michelle, and keep up the good work.
Thanks, Cory. Thanks very much.